Thanks for joining us today. Could you please state your name and what you do for Blizzard?
Yeah, my name is Morgan Day, and I'm a designer on World of Warcraft.
I'm Shani, I'm one of the producers of World of Warcraft.
Awesome. So, first question. In 8.1, we see that a Mythic Plus currency system is being added for Azshara armor. Can we see that being added in other places, such as raids or PvP?
Yeah, so right now, as you've seen on the PTR, with the introduction of Tides of Vengeance, one of the things that we got a lot of feedback about with Azshara was that with the Mythic Plus system, it was really hard to find pieces of Azshara that you were going after, because you only had that one shot at the end of week Mythic cache that comes up. So that was one of the things that we heard a lot of feedback about specifically for Mythic Plus dungeons and trying to get the dungeon gear. So this is one of the things that we wanted to explore and introduce it with Tides of Vengeance to kind of help with some of that feedback that we were getting. In terms of other areas of the game that we can introduce that, I think that's something that we would love to explore. But right now we're just sticking to the Mythic Plus update and the vendor for that.
Awesome. Okay. What do you think of the re-origination array traits in Uldir? Can we expect to see that going forwards into Battle of Azshara lore, or is that going to stop with Uldir?
Sure. So yeah, a re-origination array I thought personally was super cool. Like as we were talking about it, with the group, it was this really cool idea of like, okay, what about if this Titan technology, it's kind of like learning over time, right? It's like getting stronger. So that was really where that idea started, where that seemed like this really cool, interesting mechanic that we could introduce within that raid, because it made a lot of sense there. It just seemed like it fit really well, and it was also this nice, elegant way to increase player power over time outside of just their item level. So where we might have been talking about having to nerf certain mechanics or counters in Uldir at this point, the re-origination array is kind of doing a little bit of that work for us. In terms of what we're going to do in Battle for Azshara lore, I think that isn't currently planned. I think people have probably already seen some of the traits that have been coming out of there, and they're really cool and exciting, and they're kind of zombie themed, but for that particular mechanic, I don't think that was something that we were looking to introduce for Battle of Azshara lore. It was really one of those things that, oftentimes where we see things that feel like they fit and make a lot of sense is when we'll try to explore that space, but it's not something that we're saying, with every new raid tier, this is a mechanic that we're going to have to find a way to make it work within this raid.
Awesome. So with the World First race being streamed and it gaining a lot of popularity, are there any plans, or are there too many complications to start the race at the same time? I think that's something that a lot of people have been wanting to see.
Right. Yeah, that's something that we've discussed quite a bit. There are some, like you mentioned, some complications with doing that. Like we have our, US is on Tuesday and then EU is on Wednesday, and that's something that we'd have to discuss on a larger scale to kind of look at that cadence across the whole game. This is just kind of the way that it's functioned for a really long time, and it's always worked out fairly well. I can't think of a race off the top of my head where that's actually had, like, oh man, well, they killed it on Tuesday and they killed it on Wednesday. Who wins, right? I don't think that's come up in recent history that I can recall, at least. It is something that we have discussed and would look to potentially revisit moving forward, but it's not something we're changing anywhere in the near future.
Awesome. So in the What's Next panel, an underwater boss was mentioned with a maybe. Can you share more about that and why there was a maybe?
Right, so this is something that's hard to do something there.
Yeah, it's just, Morgan likes to do weird things. He likes to push the limits and see what he can do and what he can put our players through. So this was his next crazy idea, was what if we had an underwater boss?
Yeah.
I think it's still in early development, but we're pretty committed to trying this route out. Is it still a question mark?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, everyone has fond memories of certain, be it different games, or you hear a lot of people talk about Bashir and fighting underwater, and some people thought it was amazing. A lot of people you talk to are like, please don't make me fight underwater. I don't know, if it just feels like one of those things, like I was talking about earlier, oftentimes it feels like, we have to at least explore these opportunities as they're given. With Rise of Azshara, right, it's the Naka, it's these huge forces that you have seen, they're underwater creatures. Of course they would try to fight you where they have the biggest advantage, underwater in their environment. You're like coming into their house to bring the fight to them. So it was one of those things that's like, if we're ever going to do this,
Feels like a missed opportunity.
right? Exactly. If you don't do it in
yeah.
2 years, or in however many years down the line when we're talking about that, we're going to kick ourselves. We're like, why didn't we do that again? It's
and
like,
again, there's different mechanics that we could put in the fight to make it easier to make it better for players, like the underwater walk speed or the air bubbles and things like that. So it's still in early development, but we'll see how it goes.
the long stride as you are in the water.
Yeah, it kind of reminds of Alec here with that, that
Yeah.
third axis kind of thing.
Exactly, right? Like, that was one of those things where we've done flight in encounters before with Kael'thas and Alakir. There's been some other areas where you've like kind of temporarily got to fly around for a little while. Alakir, I think, is a cool example of that. Really, it was we all just went up together or down together, depending on your group's strategy. But yeah, this is a case where it's like you hear about a Nazjatar raid with Naga, and there's going to be all these epic monsters in there, and then everyone, their first question is, so what about an underwater boss? And it's like, okay. At a certain point, that expectation reaches a point where it's like, we have to try, guys, we have to try, right? Like maybe when we're talking about Rise of Azshara in the future, and we're doing some of our raid testing, people will see it and be like, I saw that interview, he was totally wrong. Well, at least, giving it a shot.
So we tried.
Exactly.
Alright, so a lot of people have been asking for Master League deck. Are there any plans to change that at all?
So yeah, with Battle for Azeroth, we changed looting to be more about personal loot for everyone, including in, I think what you're talking about was like with guild groups and
yes.
raids, it was, we had master looting. So that's one of those things where we're always listening to player feedback, we're always looking at areas that we can adjust things where possible. Loot trading is a big part of that discussion, right? Like, as you might not have master looter, you could still trade around gear with each other. That was one of those places where we just felt like this was a good time to try to move the whole game forward with master looter, with personal loot. So it's not something that we were talking about changing with Tides of Vengeance, but we're constantly hearing player feedback and listening to that, and this is we feel like it's been working out pretty well. There's obviously always room for iteration.
At a later time, we feel like that's what's right for the game again, then we could definitely see bringing it back. But at this time, I think we're happy with how personal it is working.
So kind of a follow-up question to that, are there plans to improve like the trading logic behind, a lot of people have been talking about if I get a staff drop, but I haven't gotten a staff in the past and I have a dagger, I can't trade it away, or a socket makes it not an upgrade, that kind of thing.
Right.
Any kind of improvements in trading logic?
So for Tides of Vengeance, there's nothing planned for that right now. We have definitely heard the feedback. It was kind of a fun discussion for all of us when it was like, oh right, for so long we've been living with artifact weapons with Legion, and that was never even a conversation. And then with Battle for Azeroth, it's like, yeah, exactly. If I'm a paladin, you need a two-hander for one spec and sword and shield for the next spec, and that's always one of those things where, depending on certain specs and things that you're going, the different types of gear you might need versus like a staff versus a one-hand and offhand. That isn't something that we are changing with Tides of Vengeance, but I think, as we're seeing it play out, and like I said, now that we're having to live in the world where I have a staff and then I get an offhand and I can't trade it to you, that's definitely an area that we would want to discuss further for sure.
It's good to hear. So are there any plans to have any legendaries, something like the ring from Warlords of Draenor?
I don't think that we have any plans to add any legendaries right now, but that's not to say that in a future update we wouldn't. A lot of times that's towards the end of an expansion cycle, so we'll see.
Awesome.
So wait, you want legendaries back?
Maybe not Legion style, but...
Okay.
So you named one, you added a doubloon vendor for Island Expeditions. Are there plans to allow better targeting of the current rewards, like the Squawks Mount?
I think that this is still going to be random drops. The new mounts and toys and stuff that will be available on the vendors will be separate from the loot table that's dropping from the islands right now.
We are doing a bunch of other cool stuff with the Islands Expeditions and Tides of Vengeance though as well. We've heard a lot of feedback about the feature and how people are engaging with it. And in Tides of Vengeance, we're actually adding 2 new islands, which I know adding more variety in terms of the environments that are going out there is really cool. We're also looking at adding more of the kind of like dynamic events that will pop up on the island. So where we are fighting against different enemy teams. There's also the different ecologies that show up on the island. There's also like your different spawn point. If you've done islands, you're familiar with that big Azurite golem that appears. So that is actually going to go into a bucket of different events that can actually happen. So in Tides of Vengeance, there'll actually be like other things that might happen in place of that guy, like an Azerite extractor might pop up on the island, and you'll be able to go take control of it and slowly siphon Azerite, which also means the enemy team can come attack that, which is pretty cool. Another thing that we're doing with islands that we think is should be pretty exciting is adding some other rewards mechanisms to islands expeditions. For instance, we're talking about adding that concept of like a treasure map. So when you're doing an island, you might, once you complete it, you might get a treasure map. And that treasure map would start almost like an elite mission, if you're familiar with some of the elite missions from Legion. And those elite missions would have really big, epic rewards, right? Like, it's a treasure map. There better be some awesome buried treasure at the end of this treasure hunt. So that's another one of the things that we're looking at, because we've gotten more feedback about missions as well, and wanting some more lucrative missions. So we're saying, okay, let's look at where we can introduce that. And with islands, it seemed like a really awesome opportunity, because it's like, there's treasure on this island, right? Yeah. let's give people an opportunity to find some of those things. So we haven't nailed down exactly what's going to be rewarded from those treasure maps, but we were definitely talking about things like, the new Azerite armor currency could come off those treasure maps and things like that.
Okay. So I mean, the Azerite armor currency isn't just limited to scrapping, disenchanting, and then Mythic plus cash. You're thinking of actually other.
Yeah, we were totally talking about potentially rewarding it from other sources as well. So for instance, like we were discussing if it could go on this treasure map, for instance, and we thought it was also cool to get it from scrapping, like we mentioned, like, as you're going out there and doing your world quest and you see that, you see that piece of Azerite armor that you need, you still might be excited to see it, because that'll get you some more of that currency to go work towards that next piece that you're actually looking for.
Yeah, we've gotten a ton of feedback on Azerite armor, so that's just one of the things that we're doing to try to improve that system on our side. Another thing that we've done is we've added a thin ring to the new Azerite pieces, so now players will have more choice and more options, and that trait that you look for on that one piece of gear, it now has a higher chance of being on your new gear. We've also taken out the bottom traits that we thought were interesting or compelling and replaced them with new things that we think are more gameplay driven and that players will think are more interesting. So we're really excited to see how players are reacting to these new changes.
Awesome. So coming up in, we're having season 2 in Tides of Vengeance. Are there plans to add like season-specific dungeon rewards from Mythic Plus? Because raid, you get transmog sets and cool raid traits. Mythic Plus just kind of swaps the affixes.
Do you mean like cosmetics, like mounts?
Yeah,
or do
cosmetics,
you mean
titles, mounts.
Yeah, so absolutely. We were talking about adding some, potentially adding some new achievements in 8.1 for that. A lot of people have talked about, hey, I've done a 10 in time across all the Mythic Plus dungeons. What does that mean? So we were saying, okay, cool. If we look at Mythic Plus the same way we would look at some of our raids, we have, ahead of the curve and cutting edge as achievements that come out of those activities. What would be the equivalent of that? So we were talking about, potentially adding some of those updates for Tides of Vengeance as well in Mythic Plus.
Right, so just kind of like a title, like the, if you cook a Mythic, get the Purifier, or a last boss Mythic mount kind of thing, anything like that?
No plans for titles or mounts, but we were really just looking at adding parity for that ahead of the curve.
Awesome. Okay. What are your thoughts on the affixes for Mythic Plus? Are there plans to add more? And any plans to change one, such as like Explosive, which doesn't have the best reputation in the community?
Right, totally. So a couple things that we're looking at for Tides of Vengeance. One, like you guys have seen before, actually I was reading your guys' someone wrote something about reaping. That was you did? Okay, cool. I can kind of give you some insight on what's going to go on there. So, like we said, with Tides of Vengeance, there will be a season 2, and like we have mentioned, the seasonal affix, which is right now, that is infested, which feels very like Gahoon has kind of come into, he's kind of come into our dungeons and infested some of these creatures. So this is an area where we're looking to make it feel very thematic like a season. So with season 2 in Tides of Vengeance, we're adding that affix that you saw, which was called Reaping. I guess I can tell you how it works because people will see it on the PTR soon. The idea there that we're going with is that Bon Zombie has kind of like come into the instance, and every creature in the instance, once you kill it, will rise as a lost soul or risen soul or tormented soul. And at different intervals on the enemy forces bar, so when you hit, let's say, 20%, every 20% on the enemy forces bar, all those creatures will basically attack you all at once. So it will the idea is that it will change the way that you kind of pull and approach the instance. You know, like normally this is the run that will, you know, this is my trash pull path, and this is the pull I pull here and the pull I pull here. But with
close to 20%. So
yeah,
like I only want to pull one thing because I know this huge mob is about to come at me.
yeah, exactly. And it's just like a wave of creatures, and they like sprint at you really quickly.
So like from the start of the dungeon, it'll chase you down?
Yes, exactly. Like every creature that you had killed from 0% enemy forces to 20%, a new type of soul will have risen, and they will charge at you. That's something that we're talking about testing out in the PTR soon, and we're looking to get some good feedback on it. But I saw that people were kind of looking around at what's going on with that. So that was the idea there, was that, you know, you hear Bone Somebody say, rise, and then all the creatures that you have killed come after you.
That would sound amazing to watch.
Yeah, it's created some fun moments. We've been playing around with it, and it's been really fun to watch. To your point of some of the other affixes, we're not looking to add more affixes outside of the seasonal one, but we are looking at existing affixes and trying to make changes where it makes sense. I know one of the things we've gotten a lot of feedback about, in particular with explosives, in fact, is that certain abilities don't work on them that you might expect to work on them. Right? So like if you're a shaman and you target it and you try to chain link it, or if you're a prot paladin and you throw your shield at it, it doesn't hit it. So we're looking to change how the creature works and make it a bit easier to kill for certain specs who might not have, you know, some of the tools that they would hope that would work on that don't. So
awesome. Heroic Warfronts were announced yesterday. Can you give us a little more details on those?
Sure, so those will be flexible, so you can queue with 10 or more people. So we're hoping that people like get with their guild and they're like, who's on? Let's go do this heroic warfront. And they're also going to be much harder than the ones that you're used to playing against. So right now there's kind of the sentiment, oh, it's really, you can't lose a warfront. You'd have to try to lose a warfront. You could actually lose these ones, so you have to be paying attention and trying and like working as a group to succeed in these. And they'll also have higher item level rewards. So there's that to look forward to. And it's going to extend to both of our Stormguard one and our new one, Battle for Darkshore, which is the new one in Tides of Vengeance.
Awesome. Are there plans to add more Warfronts in any of the new zones, like Mechagon or Nashatar at all?
It's something that we've talked about, but we don't currently have any plans to announce today.
Okay. We saw a lot of floating islands and waterfalls in Nashatar. Are there any like interesting ways to get around? Because those floating islands look very difficult to get to.
do you have ideas? Because we're still hard at work on that stuff, so we're always looking for cool ideas. If people have, you know, things that they want to see out there, we're always listening to player feedback, and that's, you know, Rise of Azshara is still something that's very much in development. There isn't any super concrete plans for things like that we're ready to announce, but we're always listening to player feedback and excited about what they're talking about. Also, as we've talked about, the Pathfinder achievements will be starting to open up at that point. So that's something that players can look towards to and have in an era.
Yeah, that was a question I had. What exactly are we going to have to do for the second Pathfinder? Is it similar to Legion at all?
I believe it is similar to Legion. It'll be a mix of exploration of the new content, and I believe reputations. I think it'll be exploration and reputations again.
I think we'll probably take a few cues from what we've seen in previous expansions.
Do you have plans for more allied races after Zandalari Kultiran? I know the community has latched on to certain ones, like Sathrak, Volpera, and obviously we've seen Mechanomes coming soon, so...
It's something we've definitely talked about, and we don't have any plans to share what our next ones will be, but there are some that will be coming later on.
Okay. Yeah, we're always looking specifically at allied races. It's one of those features where, you know, it's always really exciting to see what players get geeked up about, and they're like, oh my god, the Volpera are so cute, or whatever it might be, right? And also, it's a matter of, like, where's the story taking us, right? Like, what makes sense at the point in time when we're going to be exploring these things. Like, okay, cool, we feel like, you know, these guys, we've done a lot of work, and we've talked to these guys a lot. Like you said, with Mechagon, there's a lot of cool stuff that we'll be exploring and checking out Mechagon with the new, you know, 8 False Dungeon, and what are we going to be doing in there, and what relationships are we building with these people? Are they sending us in there to do things? And, you know, as it makes sense for the game to explore those different spaces, that's certainly where we look for the opportunities to add those new allied races.
Okay. Last question then. What's the deal with Sylvanas and Xalatath? We saw a picture yesterday of her holding a very interesting weapon.
We'll notice that, huh?
They did.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's, as you also saw, there is Nizalf on the horizon in the distant future. So I don't want to spoil anything or talk too much about what might be happening in those future updates. But
So it definitely wasn't a mistake.
Something cool is happening.
I mean, she's holding it. So what happens, right? That's one of those things that I'm excited for people to see how that story unfolds and see where we're going with that.
All right, thanks again for your time.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you.